Okay, good morning. Thank you. I'm Marisa Thompson, and I'm very excited to introduce our first speaker for this morning. Dr. Kathleen Wolf is a research social scientist with the College of the Environment at the University of Washington, and also partners with the USDA Forest Service on urban ecosystems projects. Kathy's studies are based on the principles of environmental psychology. Her professional mission is to discover, understand, and communicate human behavior and benefits as people experience nature in cities and towns. So with that, welcome, Dr. Wolf.
Thank you, Marisa, and thank you to everyone who has organized this really wonderful event. And also, hey, some appreciation to the AV people. They've done a great job. Yeah. Marisa shared with me the streaming link yesterday, so I looked online to see, and it was wonderful. I've been doing so many Zoom meetings. How about the rest of you? Lots of time on Zoom. It's wonderful to be in a room with people who have legs. We're here, we're together. It's great. And now for something completely different. So you have been listening to some of the best speakers in the country, researchers, practitioners, with regard to tree management, tree care, planting, and so on. And these topics, it's a lot of content in a very short amount of time. So some of it you'll probably put into practice or translate to your work fairly quickly. Other things takes a little while to seep in. And all of these topics are really, really interesting. And it's what makes you experts. It's what makes you professionals when you're interacting with trees, interacting with clients, customers, agencies, whoever you might be working with or for. But I'm going to take this in a little different direction, because a lot of the topics, the other topics you're hearing are the how to best care for, again, manage trees and so on. But probably in a lot of your interactions with other people, the question comes up of why. Why should I spend for you to come to my home and take care of these trees in a quality way? Why should I spend to invest around my school or hospital or business for trees? They take care of themselves, right? You just put them in the ground, give them some water, they take care of themselves. Well, the why question is really important, because I am a social scientist, and that's what I've attempted to understand for several decades. And so what I'm going to do is share with you some of the current research, not just my own, but coming from people who are doing studies all around the world, US of course, but also all around the world, about why we need trees in our everyday environments in cities. And this quote, I don't know about the rest of you, I collect tree quotes, and every once in a while I throw them into my presentations. But there's a range of public perceptions about trees. One is, really don't want them because they, you've heard it all. The debris, they cause a mess. They might fall on my house or my tree or my car and so on. And others just, they don't resonate to trees. It's like, what's the big deal? And then there are others that don't even notice. What? Trees? I didn't even know they were there. But for me, they are a point of imagination and inspiration. To walk in a city, see beautiful trees, know that they've been cared for, and that there has been a professional or an organization that knows what they're doing and can help to sustain these trees over time. That's important to me. And often, again, within the public, they're just in the background. What's the big deal? What do we don't need to do anything, but we do. And you know that so well, and you're learning more about that now. So what I'm going to do is to introduce this thought of reframing, or this notion of reframing. And at least in my world of academia, there's a lot of talk now about reframing due to COVID, due to public health concerns, due to our economy, you name it. There's a lot, our political system and what's happening. there's a lot of discussion about what is reframing. And so what I'm going to offer to you by way of evidence and information are some thoughts about reframing and how you convey the importance of trees, how you communicate that, how you yourself might even think about that. So what is reframing? It's a way of imagining, it's a way of talking with other people about a turn of thought, a turn of impression, a term of concepts around trees or whatever topic you're looking at. So it's often issue or problem based. Part of the discussion is usually, you know, we have a concern or we have a challenge, and how do we address that? And the context of that problem, be it the entire nation, be it a city, be it a community, be it a household. I find that even in my own home with my husband, sometimes we have to step back and reframe some things about what's going on and where we want to go, particularly as we're starting our glide towards retirement. You also are thinking about how to gain support from an audience. Not only are you personally rethinking and reframing things, but how do you convey that and bring others on board? And this can then influence a public agenda. In this case, to promote more support, more budget, more programs for trees in a community. And as all of this evolves, as these conversations happen, we start to develop what is known in psychology as a mental model. So this becomes a set of thoughts, a set of actions. They're portable. You say one word, urban forestry, which not so long ago was not very well understood, but now urban forestry in many people's minds is a set of practices, ideas, research, and so on. And so reframing is where I will take this, and some suggestions for that. And these lights are very bright, as probably a number of people have said, so I'm going to just step down here and walk a little closer to the ground. So there are some people who have indeed paid attention to trees, gardeners, philosophers, some psychologists, and they have had intuitions about the value and health benefits of trees in our communities. Those intuitions, you know, maybe were not very widespread. Certain people were very passionate about them. But in the last 40 to 50 years, what we now have is an ever expanding body of research, the evidence of why trees are important. And to the point where we now have enough evidence to move to action, we can always learn more. As a scientist myself, we can always learn more. There's always the next research question, the next grant, but we have enough knowledge now to take some of this to action. And I will be doing a second talk this morning where I will emphasize some of those ideas or some of those programs that some communities have actually begun to introduce in their communities, the action and programs. But for now, I'll focus on this reframing idea. All right, we're gradually coming out of this COVID this social experiment of COVID. And I recently went to a jazz concert, and I remembered, oh yeah, this is how concerts go. The artists or the musicians come up and they play an old hit, right? To get you in the mood, things you remember, and then they move to their newer material. That's what I'm doing. I'm starting with an old hit. That is, some of my earliest research was about retail environments. Some of you have heard about this, some of you in other talks that I've done. So are we thinking about simply trees planted in the street, 30 foot on center or whatever is appropriate? Or are we thinking about how they create quality retail environments and how those trees are selected, how they're planted, the associated vegetation and landscape that's planted with them? And so the research that we did, surveys across the nation, I'm summarizing in several slides of almost 10 years of work. We did surveys across the nation, large, mid-size, and smaller communities. And we simply surveyed people by way of pencil and paper. We weren't even doing online at the time. Intercepts, we would talk to people in person and so on. And we were asking them, what is the influence, the question was, what is the influence on your shopping behavior of having a canopy, not just individual trees, but forest canopy within a business district? And so we asked about visual quality, consumer behavior, and pricing. And we used mail-out surveys, a sample all across the nation on multiple projects, and so on. And here's what we found. Again, quick summary. The surveys contained a collection of images, about 30, 35 images. We asked people to simply rate them on a scale of 1 to 5. How much do you like this? And so here you see the mean ratings on these images. They're sorted into clusters. Highest ratings, pocket parks and full canopy, full canopy. Well, we hear from merchants so often, oh, they block my windows, they block my signs. And yet shoppers seem to prefer this sort of environment when looking at retail bricks and mortar business districts. As we see either smaller trees or the trees more widely spaced, these preference ratings go down, they're less. And finally, when we interviewed merchants, some of them told us that this is the sort of place that they actually prefer. Absolutely clear streetscape, everyone can see my business. But as you would see here, the shoppers, not so much. This is not the place that they'd like to be. We then asked other questions about place perceptions, and they told us that they found, or they believed, that the merchants in such places having tree canopy were probably more helpful and more friendly. And then the product pricing, they told us they would spend more on a list of goods and services in that forested area versus the more barren business district. So after seeing these results, as a team, you huddle, it's like, what's going on? How do we interpret this? And one notion that's quite prominent in retail now is place marketing. If you're not attracting people to online shopping, you're trying to bring them to a shopping place, place marketing, claiming and sharing the virtues and values of a place. And in that, you're developing a relationship with a person. You're hoping that they'll come back time after time, bring friends, bring family. And this is being explored more and more in retail research, retail efforts, is what is the character of place, not just product, not just the retail associates or the clerks, but what is that character of place that's important? And I offer to you from our research that trees are part of that solution, part of that equation. All right, moving on to the next reframing, because I know you work in different dimensions or different aspects of city greening or city policy, and green infrastructure is now becoming quite important. I live in Seattle, the Seattle area. We get about 30, 35 inches of rain a year. Little different here, right? But your rain pattern, my understanding is it's more kind of fits and starts, where we just get this constant drizzle in Seattle. In fact, I'm so happy to be here. I went outside yesterday for a bit of a walk and I was squinting the entire time. I'm just not accustomed to this level of sunshine. But green infrastructure, water, precipitation, how do we manage that? And we know that there are incredibly large drain and pipe systems below ground, and that can then have an influence on where trees are placed. But in addition to that, we're realizing, if you talk to civil engineers in a lot of cities, they're now realizing that continuing to expand these pipe and drain systems is not working very well. And so they're looking at more nature-based solutions. And rather than having that grid of collection drains into pipes, flush the water away as quickly as possible, they're now looking at not eliminating that, but adding more opportunities for water to seep and soak into the ground, and thereby enhancing possibly the vegetation in the surrounding area as well. Trees are a great aspect of this, or a great element of all of this. And Dave Nowak and the others who work on iTree, you may be familiar with that Forest Service model. includes then these sorts of calculations of what is the interception level, water interception level of trees, and that thus the amount of water eliminated then from going into pipes and drains. There's all sorts of interesting schemes being done. I understand that here in Albuquerque, other cities in this region of the Southwest, there is some exploration of this sort of approach. And some really creative things can be done, because if these are surface plantings primarily for the purpose of water collection, they can also be treated as microparks, places where people can encounter nature and gain some of the other benefits that I'll be talking about. And what I also see happening with this increased amount of evidence is intersections. Intersections of where it used to be, well, we're the tree people and we're the drainage people. Now we see intersections, more and more kind of crossover, cross linkages. And this is one document or one report. If you're interested in this sort of thing, if you're working with people who are on board with stormwater management with trees, also considering public health values. And so if you Google that report title, you'll find then a copy of this PDF. And again, the innovation that's happening around all of this is really exciting. Here's one example from Copenhagen, where there were some serious floods some years ago. And they know with climate change that was not a one-off situation. So they're planning ahead for it. And they've developed what they call a Cloudburst management plan. It's making use then of water storage, seepage through natural systems, nature-based solutions. But what's unique about this compared to other instances of stormwater management with vegetation that I've seen? All right, the top image, this is the same place. Both images are the same place. In the top, there you see around the perimeter, there's a walkway, and then there's the water's edge, a larger water feature. That basin, it's a large basin, but with a gentle slope. So it serves as a park when there's not these high precipitation events. The bottom image is the same place, and what they've designed or what they've calculated is the amount of water storage, temporary water storage, but still allowing for access to this green space. So it's a combination of park in all situations or at all times, but also serves then for water management, surface water management when needed. And again, if you Google Cloudburst management plan, they have a lot of really cool schematics, ranging from this fairly large size to quite small areas, say about the size of the stage, where they've combined this water collection and park sort of function. All right, another way of reframing all of this, trees, nature, and cities, is the research about nature and health shows then across the entire life cycle, from when we're very young to when we're very old, different types of benefits that we encounter. So we can, as one example, reframe trees not as just places where kids play, but as really important for child development. And let me give you some examples of that. First of all, a number of studies have been done showing that when pregnant women have more tree cover around their homes, their babies are more healthy birth weight. And these are research projects that are done across entire cities. And the first one was done in Portland, Oregon, but now they've been done in multiple cities, Los Angeles, Madrid, Spain, London, and so on. This is remarkable. More healthy birth weight. What does that mean for a kid? It means maybe less hospitalization or treatment in the moment, but it has implications across the life of a child. Children who are particularly preemies of low birth weight don't do as well in school generally. They also may be more prone to heart disease as adults. So the traits that you start out with, or the situation you start out with, has implications for one's life. Another interesting finding that's developing is the relationship of nature contact for children, but everyone, frankly, and the health of our gut. You've heard about probiotics, yogurt, certain foods, dirt, nature, contact with trees. It's the ultimate and probably the oldest probiotic. And so we're understanding that children need contact with nature at an early age. And one writer describes this as we need our old friends. Again, the relationship, if we're healthy here, we're healthier across our bodies. Even mind, even mental health is influenced by gut health. So this is one example. This shows how this evolves over time. So at birth, these dots, what they represent. So the circle, the color represents different genera of microorganisms in the gut, and the size of the dot represents the size of the population. So what you see in a fairly short time, few years, how this grows within the child. And frankly, something that we try to sustain as adults, quite important. So I'm not literally saying children should eat dirt, but time in nature, really important at an early age and ongoing. If you are interested in or work with kids in any of your projects, any of the sites that you're working at, schools or whatever it may be, the Children in Nature Network is a wonderful resource for research, for programs, for a community of people supporting all this. And it started with Richard Louve's book, Last Child in the Woods, written over a decade ago. But he and a group of followers have created this resource. Children in Nature Network, it's a website. ADHD, children get older, growing up, and they may be diagnosed with ADHD. And studies have shown that children who spend routine time outdoors, play outdoors versus play indoors, show reduced symptoms of ADHD. And you might think, well, yeah, it's the activity, blowing off steam. Well, it seems to be more than that. There seems to be something in the mental response with regard to ADHD and that time outside. A great example, some of you, how many of you are climbers yet? Still doing climbing? Okay, we've got some in the room. ISA, as I've visited other ISA chapters, other organizations that are focused on arboriculture, they do climbing competitions, and often they have a climbing event, a public climbing event. This gentleman, Johnson, is in Japan. He's Canadian, but he works in Japan. And he has developed this therapeutic climbing network. And this offers to children who have mild birth defects, very mild birth defects. They're not incapacitated at all, but they're just different enough that other kids sometimes tease them and bully them and whatnot. So he's got this network of families and kids that actually use tree climbing as a support network and as a capacity building opportunity. And I was once in Japan. Johnson invited me, and it was fabulous to be at this event and the enthusiasm of the kids. And they're not just arriving on a Saturday morning and rig up and put on a helmet and up they go. They learn about climbing. They're part of the climbing process over time and multiple experiences. And I was talking about this in Wisconsin at an event, and a gentleman pulled me aside and he said, I used to be pruning and tree management climber, and I've gone totally to this therapeutic climbing. That's his business now. He offers this for hospitals, for schools, for college campuses, sets up the rigs, helps people to climb and experience trees in this most intimate way. It's really cool. All right, kids are getting older. A number of studies are showing that school performance, classroom performance is better if there is green, more trees on the campus as well in the surrounding neighborhood. And this has to do with better grades, graduation rates, capacity or interest in going on to college, in some instances, reduced behavior issues. So there's this ongoing trajectory, this arc. And as I mentioned, we see in the research, it doesn't end with childhood. The arc continues as we're adults, as we're older people. And I won't share all of that detail, but know that that research is there and you can speak from that, because sometimes people will question, well, you know, what you're telling me about the benefits of trees, you're just telling me that, you know, not everyone knows that. But we have an incredible amount of evidence. I continue to monitor research about this general topic of trees, urban nature, and human health. And I now have a collection of over 5,000 articles that span 40 years. So we have a lot that we can speak from with conviction. All right, and so now I'll move to, excuse me, thank you. I'll move now to some of the most recent work that I've been doing, and I say myself, but it's all of this is collaborative with teams of people. And the notion, it's not just nice to have. Aren't trees pretty? Aren't they just nice to have? No, they are profoundly important to our communities. And I'll speak now about human health and wellness in that. If you happen to encounter public health people, doctors, people who are measuring COVID spread, all of that kind of thing, a term that they use is social determinants of health. And we're understanding that, yes, it's important to have access to good health care if you're sick or need treatment, but more importantly, everything in our lives, our surroundings, our environments contributes to health. And that they use the term, there we go, a framing, social determinants of health. That includes not only our individual circumstances, our genetic code, our lifestyle, do we eat organic food or drink bottled water, but the larger rings really have strong influence, access to employment, access to education, quality housing, and so on. And that outer ring, environment and ecosystem, and that's part of what contributes, an important part of what contributes to our health and wellness. A couple of years ago, colleagues and I, we did what is called a review article, and this is fairly common in academia. People do individual studies, and some of the other speakers have spoken about this. You do a very controlled, very well-planned study, and then you publish the results. And after a while, if one reads across this research, you realize, you know, there's a bunch of articles out there now. What are they telling us? So then you do what's called a review. And so we did this with regard to trees, specifically trees and human health response. And it was an unusual team for me because I collaborated with a social scientist. As a social scientist, I collaborated with public health officials. Matilda is a doctor, Adrina is a sociologist, Jennifer, public health official. So we collaborated in a way that I have not ever done, but with the focus on trees. Here's the method. It's typical very quickly. We first did a keyword search, internet, across academic data sets, databases, found over 2,000 articles. Way too much stuff, right? Look through it, review abstracts and titles, down to 400. Then we did a quality assessment of the science, down to 200. Finally kicked out some duplicates. We found about 200 studies that have to do with trees and health response. And now I'll share some of that with you. Again, this took about 1.5 years. I'll share it with you in a matter of minutes. First of all, what did we learn? Look at the publication dates. I started doing this work back in the 1990s, and there wasn't much out there to talk about. But look here in this last decade, and it's not even the complete decade. If we were to go back, that number would probably be another 40, 50 there. The axis on the left is the article count. The publication rate on this is surging. There are so many people now. There's money. There are young scholars. I actually, early on when I started this, students would come to me and say, I would love to do a study on this. Great, let's talk about it. And I wouldn't see them again. And then I'd see them in the hall in our building and I'd say, hey, what's up? You know, you want to talk again? They said, well, Professor so-and-so said there's no future in this work. I'm like, but there is now. some of the younger, brighter people are coming to this. They're finding money to do it. It's really encouraging. What else did we learn? People are using a variety of methods to understand people's response to trees. They're looking at single parks or single trees. They're looking at specific elements of trees, such as pollen or fragrance or shade, and so on. Some of the studies are actually where people are wired up or they have monitors, biomarker monitors, and they're immersed in a forest environment. I'll talk about that a bit. And then others are doing image simulation, where someone is in a lab and you're seeing an image. That image on the top is really cool because it was a preliminary study done in a prison where people who were high offenders within the prison, behavior issues, had the choice of going to what was called the Blue Room, where they could observe a video, a nature video that was streaming. And they have found reduced behavior infractions within the facility with those people choosing to do this. So looking across the 200 studies, you can imagine it was a mess. What's in all of this? You've read scientific articles. They're not a lot of fun. So to extract the goodies, to extract the really important bits within them and sort it into something that makes sense. So you start with a whiteboard, you throw stuff up, you spit wide, you see what sticks, move it around, and then in time, start to make sense of it and tell a story. This was one way we told a story. Not very easy to understand, I realize, but there again, on the right, the number of articles, and you see that gap. How many more in recent time. On the far left, the different tree settings. In the middle, what we call the subdomain are the specific examples, the specific reactions, health reactions of people to trees. And now I'll speak about that a little bit more. Summarize all of that into the takeaway, the framing. Trees are good for general wellness. We may be fine, we may be healthy, we may be feeling well, but having quality trees and urban forest around us boosts our well-being, sustains our well-being, and thus is an important social determinant of health. But if we are not feeling well, or we have a disease, or we have a condition, and it's diagnosed by a doctor or a nurse or other medical professional, a number of studies are showing that time in trees and in nature can be an antidote, can be a treatment or a therapy. And here are some examples of that. So here's a framing from this volume of research, 200 articles, winnow it down to some really key, quickly expressed messages that you might share with people when talking about why trees are important. Here are the specific health benefits that we found in this study or in this review project. You can see there's quite a range of responses. Everything from active living, which means being out and having places to walk, to thermal comfort. In other words, when it gets really hot during the summer, having a place of respite, shade, a park, a little cooler, a little more moisture in the air, so it's a little more comfortable. Mental health, and then down at the bottom there, clinical outcomes, those times when we're not feeling well, we're diagnosed by a professional and there's treatment. I want to call out that top bar. Look at how many articles we found with regard to pollen. That was troubling for us because what we discovered was these articles are scattered across all sorts of journals: urban forestry, landscape architecture, planning, sociology, psychology, and so on. But the medical journals concentrate on tree pollen. I have a feeling that most doctors who pay any attention to nature and health, that's what they're reading about, is pollen, asthma, and allergy. They're not aware of the publications in these other journals because they don't pop up on their medical databases. PubMed is the primary medical database that doctors go to see the most current research. Most of the work that we discovered does not pop up on PubMed. Pollen does. So this might be something, again, that if you're talking to someone And we know the medical community has a lot of power, a lot of oomph in our society. So this is an important sort of conversation piece with them, saying, you know, maybe you're not aware of all the other benefits that are out there. And we've got the evidence, we've got the research with regard to trees. This project was funded by Tree Fund. Got to tell you that. And please, if you have the inclination to donate to support research, they really do a great job of supporting students and sort of pilot projects that get research programs going about trees and arboriculture. All right, another screen that we did was strength of evidence. So science quality. And, you know, this is that thing of academia. Some of the other speakers have talked about this a little bit, but within this sort of social dimension, some studies demonstrate a rationale. That is, they give you a promise, they give you the suggestion because of a model of a potential benefit. Then there are correlational studies, and a lot of this is being done now, where you take canopy cover data, it might be LIDAR, NDVI, it might be a canopy or a street tree inventory, and you compare it to health data, public health data. You kind of slam them together statistically and see if there are any relationships. Moderate, quasi-experimental, there's a situation where maybe there are trees now and they're being removed for some reason, and you jump in and try to do some data collection around that. The strongest is the experimental study, which is like sort of a medical study where you have a treatment, you have a pre-post, people are randomly assigned. Really hard to do that in urban forestry, but once in a while there's an opportunity, particularly with lab experiments. And that's where doctors pay attention also, is with the experimental study. That's their gold bar of research. So what did we find in terms of illness, treatment, therapy? Top red is less persuasive, if you will. We don't have as solid research. Cancer is emerging. Treatment of cancer, not outright curing, but as a program of cancer treatment, is time and nature. And those studies are coming along. Better evidence, diabetes, respiratory illness, asthma, and healing and recovery. Finally, the strongest research by virtue of having more studies, or the quality of that work, is better cardiovascular conditions, better mental health, which I'll talk about later today, and ADHD treatment. Then in terms of general wellness, here again, quality of the evidence. Less conclusive physical activity. It's really a mixed bag about having trees and walking in those spaces, whether it's a whole lot better than just walking generally. Weight control, UV screening, you might assume, oh, if you have trees in shade, but obviously different trees have different canopy structure, and that has an effect on UV screening. Second level of research, a little more conclusive, a little more persuasive. Birth outcomes, I mentioned that. Thermal comfort, being in a green area, a park or an open space while during a heat event, and better than physiological response with thermal comfort. The highest values then are the best research: stress reduction, anxiety reduction, mental function, and immune function, seeing some work on how well our immune systems respond. Many of these elements are mental health. And again, I'll be talking about this in a little more detail later today, or later this morning. All right, looking across all of that, what met the highest bar of research quality? And so I'll share a little bit of that. What we see fairly consistently is in an experimental approach within hospitals, people who have a view of nature from their windows, or even having a level of green within their room, it's better. They heal faster. They may use less powerful painkillers. Sometimes they leave the hospital more quickly. They recover more quickly. A study of this type was first done in 1984 by Roger Ulrich, and others have replicated the study. Different health conditions, post-surgery recovery, disease, and so on, and continuing to find this result. And then some of the strongest research has come from Japan, South Korea, and now from other parts of the world about forest bathing, forest therapy. And this is increasingly getting attention. I'm actually working with several university researchers. We're going to introduce a forest bathing practice on campuses. Right now, university students are so stressed. The combination of COVID, remote learning, and just the elevated stress level because of expectations as students. We're seeing this now into high schools as well. So we'll be doing an experimental study with forest bathing and see how these students respond, these kids respond. What is it? It's not just going out in the woods and wandering about, or even worse, it's not going into the woods and continuing to check your texts and email and so on. It's a very intentional experience, opening your senses to what is around you with regard to trees and the environment. And there are now certified forest guides. So if any of you are thinking about a career shift, there are now people who are making a run at making their profession forest therapy guides. And so they're connecting with schools and hospitals and clinics to offer this sort of opportunity for people. What are the benefits that we've seen with forest bathing? Extensive, improved hypertension, improved blood pressure, improved cortisol rates, which is an indicator of stress. When we're stressed, we emit a substance called cortisol, and it can be measured with a mouth swab. So that, pre-post, after you're in, out of the woods, all that kind of thing. Depression reduction, reduced anxiety, better sleep. And one really interesting finding, still kind of preliminary, but still really interesting. So those of you, you're in a forest area, and phytoncides, that is the volatile chemical that's emitted by trees. You could kind of smell it when you're in a deep forest area. Phytoncides we may take in, and it may actually boost our immune system function, what doctors call natural killer cells. And so this is still very preliminary. It's very complex, of course, to measure the amount of intake of this material, how we process it, and then how it might play out in our immune system. Very complex, but there's a hint, some fairly good studies suggesting that this does indeed happen. Mental health, a lot of value to mental health, to be continued later this morning. And finally, I'll end with another way of reframing trees. Early on with trees and climate as well, trees sequester carbon. I suggest that in cities, the carbon sequestration rate, not so much. I think we're actually talking about climate adaptation. In other words, with the consequences of climate and CO2 emission, how do we adapt to that? And there's so many cities and communities that are now thinking about that and innovating about that. And again, trees can be part of that solution. In my interest in working with public health, we see an intersection then of the potential for trees in mitigating climate and also trees mitigating or adapting for health. Here's one document that I collaborated with the one of the climate labs of the US Forest Service. And very intentionally, we were attempting to intersect climate and human health. And this is a menu of potential actions. It's very detailed. I'm just giving you the quick overview here, but it's structured as strategies, kind of the general city level policies, if you will, then approaches, the next scale, and tactics being the things that you do on the ground with trees, with health in mind, human health in mind. And here are the strategies, a total of 9. Again, I can't relay enough the adequate detail about this, but if you download the document, it's free. You can search it. It's available through the Forest Service and other sources. But the core strategies are about managing trees and managing urban forests. What I contributed was to wrap around strategies 1 and 2 and 8 and 9 with regard to human health. How do we shape these trees? How do we insert them in the environment for climate response, but in a way that then endorses and manages and improves human health? And getting right down to the site level, this is an article that I did again with some colleagues, and we looked at then how is this expressed right on the ground, finally, in terms of experience, in terms of views from buildings, in terms of creating thermal refuge, those pockets of places where one can find cooler environments, smaller environments during hot phases or during summer peak heat. So there you are, quick overview of research and some possible ways of reframing not only how you talk about trees, but how you might bring others to reframe the importance of trees in their own minds or in their own organizations and institutions. We have enough evidence for action. Always, as a scientist, yes, more studies are possible, but we have enough evidence now to take this to action in a defensible way, in a way that we can say, yeah, you want the evidence? I'll go contact Dr. Wolf and I'll have that for you in a day or two. We can do this now, and there are other resources. You've met a number of people here over this meeting who can also help share that for you. I'm moving now to studies of gratitude. If people understand and begin to incorporate trees in their communities for these reasons, what is the gratitude that they might express? A reciprocity, because we see in studies that people who feel gratitude also experience health benefits. In your own work, I challenge you. I will be here through the day. I will challenge you. Think about any of these messages or maybe others that you might reframe, that you might take back to your colleagues, your organization, your clients, and reframe how you talk and deliver information about trees. Don't have much time. Probably I'm down 5 minutes. Perfect. Haven't talked about this much, but what we're seeing now is increased interest in what are the economic implications. And when I talk about this, inevitably there's someone who raises their hand and says, yeah, you might save money if people aren't getting as much medical treatment, they're not spending as much on therapy or meds or whatever. How do we transfer that to our tree budgets? That answer is not clear yet, but I'm starting to see that happening as insurers are seeing, you know, this tree thing is valuable. Maybe we kick in some funding locally. But what I do see is increased interest in trees, which then translates to political support for bigger budgets, be it the city, be it a local firm or a business that's willing to invest. I once was speaking about all of this, and a property manager from Fidelity, the investment and wealth management firm, he said, thank you so much. I've been trying to convince our budget people, our administrative people to invest in more in the landscape around our campus, our business campus. And this is exactly the sort of information I need. So that translation, it's not direct of money moving from here to there, but you're building possible support and political will for greater budget. And the amount that we might save by planting trees and green around our nation. We spend almost 20% of our gross domestic product in the US on healthcare. So if by having more green space, which improves health, which improves the need for health services, maybe then we are starting to see some of that money being moved then to our budgets. Here in the United States, people spend about, this is average, right? About 11,000, that was 2018. With COVID, inevitably or undeniably, that has been more. Comparatively, New Mexico, a little less per person, but those numbers, as you see on the bottom, have no doubt jumped as well, due to inflation and also due to increased healthcare demand. And doing the economics on this is complex, a variety of elements, understanding the beneficiaries, understanding the evidence, understanding the type of nature experience you have, the type of health response, all of that mixed together in fairly complex economic models. And that pops out a number of deferred costs. So what we don't spend on health maybe then could go to trees. And again, it's in the earliest stages, but people are working on this sort of modeling to relate trees to healthcare expenses. And again, old favorites. Last night we had dinner, board members and speakers, and someone encouraged me to share a couple of websites. So this is a website. It's a little dated. We did this over a decade ago, but it was at the time an effort to compile the current evidence about nature and health. So if you go to this website, Green Cities Good Health, you won't necessarily see the latest research, but what you will see is about a dozen topics that give you a sense, again, reframing. Maybe there's some topics that are of particular interest to you or your clients. And while it doesn't have the latest research, it does have a way for you to wrap trees into the social determinants of health message. And then this is sort of my ECV. It's my portfolio, if you will, of research. And it has then a number of categories. And there's other work that we've done, stewardship evaluation, some things with policy and planning, and so on. So if you're interested in exploring a little bit more, this is available as naturewithin.info. So thank you. I don't know if we have any time left for questions, maybe 2 minutes, 2 minutes. So if anybody has any comments, questions, and I will be around through the day. And I always enjoy the after talk conversations. I hear about new ideas, great stories, great examples, and even suggestions for places to visit in the city where I might see some of this in action. So thank you very much. Pleasure to be here. And I really, really am enjoying this event.